Welcome to our latest Soccer Down here 1v1 as we get ready for Pachuca's visit to Atlanta on Tuesday. Somebody who knows Pachuca, Liga MX, and CONCACAF really, really well. Jon Arnold joining us. Jon, thanks for the time right now. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be on. Good to chat, Jason.
Yeah, I want to get into kind of big picture stuff here with Pachuca coming to town. When it was announced that that was going to be the big summer friendly with the American Family Insurance Cup, personally, I was really excited. I love what Pachuca has done over the last couple of decades from a youth development side of things. They've been really, since they established themselves in the first division in the late 90s, they've been one of the leading producers of talent in Mexico, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The headline alumni, I guess, are Yving Lozano and Eric Gutierrez, these two national team players who both made the jump at various times to PSV. Guti is still there. Lozano has moved on to Napoli, and they're kind of, they'll be on the World Cup roster. These are kind of cornerstones of Mexico and the national team. But even when you look back a little deeper, a couple guys that MLS fans will certainly know: Rodolfo Pizarro. Whether Atlanta fans like him or not is obviously one thing. Whether Mexico fans like him or not right now is one thing. But,
Good question.
clearly a top level player who certainly reached the highest level and maybe still can kick on even farther. We'll see what he does in the next couple tournaments. But, he's a Pachuca product. Hector Herrera, who just joined the Dynamo, is a Pachuca product. And you can look back. There's a few more kind of names that people will recognize. But it really has been this boom in the last couple decades, as you say, I think, where Pachuca wisely noted that, they're not a grande. They're not one of the four big Mexican teams. And maybe fans are disappointed not to see one of those names in a friendly game like this. But at the same time, I wonder if you get more from a game like this. And of course, against a team that very easily could have won Liga MX this year. They finished first in the regular season. They went to the final. So it's a team that I think, has plenty to offer. We can get into some of the names and the people that will be kind of figures and maybe some of the stars, in a minute here. But I do think it's a team that historically has built its brand on this academy success and then converting that into first team success with a league title. It's also historically, one of the oldest teams in the Americas. A really rich history when you talk about being founded by miners who had come over from Cornwall to look for, I believe, some sort of silver ore. And you still, when you visit Pachuca, see the kind of remnants of that heritage. But it really is, in a lot of ways, the cradle of North American soccer. And so, yeah, it's a pretty cool thing that they're touring, playing a couple MLS teams, and that it is Pachuca that's over there. Maybe it's not as recognizable as a name, but it's a name with plenty of history and plenty of things to offer in the present as well.
Yeah, where I first got a chance to see Pachuca on a regular basis was the 2005-6 era with Calero and goal. And in the great series in CONCACAF, I think it was Champions Cup at that time with Houston, and really building a nice rivalry with them. Is it fair to put Pachuca maybe, I agree with you, they're not one of the grandes, but are they maybe the top of the next tier?
It's a little complicated because there's a constant debate about who's a grande, and I think there's a pretty understood definition that it's these four teams that historically have been the most successful: America and Chivas, the two biggest teams in Mexico, and then Pumas and Cruz Azul, kind of rounding out Mexico City. Then you have to look at the modern game and say, well, Tigres and Monterrey, the two teams in Monterrey, the two northern teams, have been such big spenders and so successful as a result of that they are sort of included as this. Are they the fifth grande? And of course, the traditional fans laugh that off. They say, there's no way, you guys can't compete. I think Pachuca, it's fair to say they're kind of at the top of the second tier. But with that, I think you kind of have to caveat it with the fact that this is one of the oldest teams in the Americas. It's the oldest team, I believe, in Mexico that's kind of organized and still playing. I might be off on my dates by a year or two. And they have six championships. And this is a league that now gives you two titles a year. So I think, in a way, Pachuca in modern times, in the last couple, 5-10 years, you talk about going back to 2005, 2006, certainly can say they're one of the quote unquote best of the rest. And I do think they're just run in a really nice way. FC Dallas faced Pachuca in a CONCACAF Champions League series. I guess it's been several years now, 2015, 2016, I think, and barely Pachuca barely got by and ended up lifting that trophy. That was when Chucky Lozano was still on the team, and I was speaking with a lot of people in the FC Dallas front office about this kinship that they felt with Pachuca because of this desire to be great on the academy level and to win teams win titles in the first team. There's just a huge level of respect in the FC Dallas front office, and I know in other front offices around the league about how Pachuca has built itself, the way it runs itself as a club. And look, even some of the bigger teams in Mexico, yeah, Chivas is really popular. Yeah, sometimes they win trophies, but and then they put the handcuffs on themselves by only hiring Mexican players. But I don't think there's a lot of quote unquote respect around the Americas, and certainly not around MLS, as to how they're run, because sometimes it's a bit of a clown show might be harsh, but there might be hints of red noses. So
yes.
it can be difficult. And look, like, with all respect to Chivas as well, like, I think Chivas fans would agree, and sometimes I think their own directors would agree, that sometimes things aren't run in the most efficient way, aren't run in the most effective way. Pachuca seems to kind of buck that trend, and so I do think that they are an important Mexican team, even if they're not one of these historic greats.
I love that we're going to get more of this interaction with the Leagues Cup, across the board next year. And I definitely want to pick your brain on the effect of that before we go. But let's get into this Pachuca team right now that played Austin last night, thrashed them 4-1. And it's kind of a mix. There's a few guys who are away right now, but the core of the team that was the super leader in the Clausura season is here. And there's so many talented players with Pachuca coming to Atlanta this week.
Yeah, there really are. I mean, it was a very good team, and I think they were just sort of missing one little push, and that push turned out to be Almada, the manager, who came from Santos Laguna. I thought that he might end up taking the Uruguay national team, because it was at the same time as Tavares was kind of on the way out, and I thought, look, this guy's Uruguayan. He's been unbelievably good with Santos Laguna. It would make a lot of sense, and of course, that ends up being another former Atlanta foe taking over in Diego Alonso, and a former Pachuca manager, actually. But Almada ends up in Pachuca, and seemed like he just kind of took stock of what he had and said, yeah, this will work. And they run out, and they win the regular season. There's an interesting kind of mix of players. You have kind of, I think, something that shows what Pachuca has built. When you look at, there are some academy products who are part of that roster. There are some players they've purchased after they've had some success in Mexico, and then there are some, imports that they maybe even spent a fair amount of money on. I'm thinking of the center back Gustavo Corral, who has been one of the best defenders in the league for the past couple of months. He's an older Argentine veteran who came straight from Europe, from Celta de Vigo, but has been part of this core of defense that's been really good. Pachuca in the regular season scored the most goals and allowed the fewest goals. So, it's pretty hard to kind of say, oh, this was their glaring weakness, because there wasn't one statistically. And even when passing the eye test, they really did that as well. I think one of the most interesting players to keep an eye on is Victor Guzman. He's a guy who, a Mexican player who's kind of entering his prime right now. I think he's 27, 28. There was a move to Chivas that was supposed to happen a couple of years ago that got derailed because of a positive drug test that never exactly was cleared up. But he said I never did it. It absolutely, false positive, whatever. He mounted a strong defense, and then it ended up that he just didn't go to Chivas and has been playing for Pachuca. But he's been playing so well that he's, plenty of fans want to see him with the national team. He's a very versatile player, can kind of play on the wing, can play through the middle. So he's a fun attacker to watch. And I think if he's part of that group that features, it's tough to know exactly who's going to be on the field, because I don't know what their plans are for minutes. They're in this preseason moment where they do want to get players in rhythm, but they also don't want to exhaust players. So if he's on the field, I think he's one to watch. And the other one is Nico Ibanez, who was so good in the playoffs. I think he scored 6 goals in the Liguilla. Maybe 6 goals in 5 matches that he played in, something like that, something absurd. It might be even more goals than that. But just to kind of became a scoring machine. Poacher is harsh. He's a bit more mobile than a player you might think of as a traditional poacher, but I would say often a right place, right time guy, and just a good finisher. So he's a player who will be fun to watch as well. And like I said, there's a couple Mexico academy guys. It's a bit of a bummer that, like, a guy like Kevin Alvarez, who is a right back prospect, who I believe is on Mexico's Olympic team. He's now getting into the senior team. He's not going to be there because he's with Mexico right now. Eric Sanchez now is with Mexico right now. There's one more player that they have called up. So, there's a couple guys missing. It's not going to be Pachuca A like it would be in the Leagues Cup, like we think we'll be seeing here in the future. But, I would say Guzman, Cabral, Ibanez are kind of three guys where you can look on the field and say, "Oh, I'm going to keep an eye on these guys because I think something fun's going to happen if I watch carefully from the stands."
Yeah, looking at the roster from the Austin game, there's another guy who jumped out to me because I heard a little bit about his story before. He came through the Sueño Alianza program and earned a contract with the Pachuca group. Mauricio Isais from Texas, who ended up down there. Lefty, who he's even been mentioned as a guy at 21 in the past. He was mentioned as a guy who maybe the U.S. should take a look at coming from Texas. Pachuca seems to be starting to expand a little bit with a couple of guys from the States in their traveling group right now.
Yeah, and listen, I think that every Mexican club has realized that they'd be a bit foolish not to. That Alianza, that football program, has been so good at scouting these players, and honestly has made it so easy for scouts to turn up to one of the showcases that they have in the U.S. and to say, "All right, here we go. It's best versus best. If these guys can do it against these guys, then they're probably going to be able to play." So you see a lot of that interchange, and Pachuca's always been a club where Mexico doesn't have those development regions that MLS has.
Yeah.
And I think that Pachuca's always done a very good job. I mentioned Hector Herrera. He's from Baja California. He was in Club Tijuana was kind of just getting rolling when he was becoming a professional, but he was in that footprint, and yet he ends up as a Pachuca player. Some of the other guys I mentioned also are not. Chucky, I think, is from Mexico City. It's not extremely far to get from Mexico City to Pachuca, but it's also not next door. So, some of the scouting that they've done at a very young age has been incredible. And look, if you're a Mexican club that's not scouting in the U.S. right now, especially in that borderland where you can sign those players as domestic players or players formed in Mexico, as they're called in the Liga MX roster regulations, you're simply not going to keep up. You're not doing it right. You're not up to snuff. And so, it's not at all a surprise to see, Texans, Californians, Arizonans in there. And I think that's something that unless something, changes either with MLS teams being way more aggressive about it or FIFA coming in and saying, no, this can't happen because of Article 18 or whatever. I think it's just a trend that we're gonna see continue, and maybe adds a little fun and spice to these Leagues Cup games that we're talking about.
Yeah, let's jump into Leagues Cup just a little bit because I think maybe better than anybody else the potential of this tournament and what it could bring. I think to both leagues because both leagues are looking for different things out of it. I have a feeling they're both going to get it, and it just feels like such a transformational moment for both leagues going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think the Mexican fan looks at the League's Cup and just sees it as a cash grab. And I'm not saying that it isn't a cash grab,
Sure.
but I also like to grab cash. Put me in one of those wind tunnels on a
Hey.
game show and I'll grab as many bucks as I can, right? I think MLS clearly wants the legitimacy, the fan interest, the sort of being seen as a quote unquote serious football nation that I think that you can get from playing Mexican teams and beating Mexican teams, something they haven't really done in the CONCACAF Champions League up until this year, and certainly haven't habitually done in the CONCACAF Champions League. And I think some of the things that Mexico can get out of Leagues Cup sound like excrement from an animal, but are true. In that, I think that when you say like best practices, it sounds like you're just making something up. But I was just in Mexico for Bayer Leverkusen's friendly against Toluca. And Toluca does a lot of things right. They do a lot of things really well. And yet, when you're talking to some of the German officials, there's some things that are just standard operating procedure in Mexico that they find surprising. And I think that when Mexico has that contact, just like when a player has contact with a player of a different style, a referee who doesn't call the same fouls, you figure it out and you grow. I think Mexico will have that same experience with the closeness from MLS. I think you're going to see a lot of leaps and jumps forward on the business side, and I think that player development is an area where, although we're talking about Pachuca being able to scout in the U.S., the U.S. teams have done a really good job of not only forming players and making them good enough for European teams to want to sign them, but also to make it lucrative for them to sell those players, for those players to be able to continue their development in a system that, as much as we want to stand CONCACAF, and I do want to stand CONCACAF, the best development in the world is still in Europe. We all know that. We all know the best coaching is there. We all know the best education in a soccer sense is there. We all know it's the best setting to be in. And we should work to change that. But right now, the reality is the best players are the ones who get to Europe the fastest and get coached up. And a lot of teams are not open to doing that. Pachuca's been an exception in that case. And even then, there's still some players on Tuso's roster who I say, man, that guy probably should have gone sooner and didn't. Or that guy should have gone to, Benfica instead of going to Chivas in the case of like Rodolfo Pizarro. Or that guy should have gone to, some club in the Netherlands instead of to Tigres, and yet this is the path that they've taken. So those are the things that I think, you're not going to change it overnight. You're not going to change it just having Leagues Cup existing. But I do think that MLS clearly gets that prestige, the football street cred, I guess is a way to put it. And I think the Mexican clubs are going to get a better understanding of what MLS has done right to grow so quickly in the last 5-10 years, that after just getting thumped year after year after year in CONCACAF Champions League and not selling players and not providing players to the national team at the right quality, and the US missing the World Cup in 2018, that suddenly it seems like things are really clicking and really going in the right direction.
It's been interesting over the last almost 12 months here in Atlanta with Gonzalo Pineda coming in. There's been a much broader connection between Atlanta United and Mexico. We had seen Cubo Torres in the past. We'd seen Jurgen Damm, another Pachuca product. But now we're seeing even some loans. There's some rumors of things coming up for the summer window that could happen, as Atlanta's had everybody on the roster seemingly get injured this year. But they've had a lot of success with a loan from Chivas and Ronaldo Cisneros. Do you expect to see more moves like that between MLS and Liga MX teams where, a player might be stuck on either side of the border, but loaned to the other side and thrive?
Yes, I think so. And I think that it can be really positive for both sides, right? And, you look at Cisneros is a good example. The center back they're linked with at Tigres is a good example. I can't, honestly, his name doesn't come straight to mind because he's a guy who never plays at Tigres, but
right.
Maybe he plays with Atlanta, right? Like, and it can go both ways. There's examples of guys from MLS who've gone to Mexico, even like a Bofo Salcedo, who's going to be with Toluca this year, played with Pumas. He has a bit of a leg up because he randomly counts as a quote unquote formed in Mexico player that I was mentioning. But I think more broadly, I think you're going to see more of this relationship. We saw Torres go from Atlas to Chicago. Right. And I think it also depends on what happens after that. If MLS can truly build a reputation as, that Miguel Almiron can't be an outlier. If the Almiron case of there's a pipeline from Latin America to MLS to Europe, if that actually starts flowing, then I think a lot of guys and their agents and the people around them are going to say, man, this would be really good for you to go to MLS for a year, 2 years, and then kick on. But unfortunately, right now, we haven't seen that many players do that aren't named Miguel Almiron. So I think that the future long term of the relationship depends on that. But I think short term, teams are definitely waking up to the idea that, hey, there are players that are quote unquote stuck on these rosters or that are expendable, viewed as expendable by the front office. And that could benefit their team. And I think that that's something we will see a bigger exchange. And I think that's actually true of the entire CONCACAF region. I think when you look at some of the other countries, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras needs to export players. I don't think they have a single player based abroad on their U20 roster, which is not where you want to be, because you want those guys, again, just like in Europe, they're still getting the best coaching. We're probably doing a better job right now in the United States and Canada than is being done in some of the Honduran domestic teams. Maybe they'll win the tournament and make me look like a fool. And, it is on home soil, so it's possible. But talk in my face if you do it, Catrachos. But no, I just think in the general CONCACAF region, I think MLS teams are scouting more aggressively, smarter, devoting more resources, and not overlooking the region like you can. It was for a long time very easy to just say, well, we can just go to Argentina and Colombia and get our 1-2 guys and call it good. Now that the roster rules are expanding a bit, and that you're seeing more players, emerge from these places, I think you're seeing more care being taken. And I know Atlanta's one of those teams that's scouting Latin America, I think, in a pretty savvy and aggressive way. Cisneros is an example of that.
It's been wild just thinking back to the last 5-10 years and where the relationship is now. And you've covered it at the forefront. For people who might not know about your newsletter and what kind of content you can get there, let them know.
Well, it's pretty weird. No, if you're
I
into the
love
weird
that though.
elements, I know. That's why I do it. No, my most recent story is a Spanish freelance journalist who ended up on the coaching staff of Bon Air. I've told stories about all sorts of different things. The team of Mexico fans that they call the Mexico fan national team. They played Haiti. They played Belize.
Oh,
They
wow.
beat Belize U20s. So that's something,
Wow.
anything weird and wacky I do, but also general coverage of the CONCACAF region from a wider angle. I think that there's a lot of my colleagues in the US who do a nice job covering the United States. There's people who are doing a good job covering Mexico. But I don't know that in English there's a lot of resources or a lot of people doing coverage of the region as a whole, other than myself on the newsletter Getting CONCACAF. So it's a mix of my analysis and columns and kind of just thoughts and features where I call up people, do interviews, and try and tell their story or try and tell a trend story or try and tell the bigger picture. Um, so yeah, it's a free newsletter that people can subscribe to. There is an option to go premium for $5 a month or $50 a year. It works out to less than $1 a newsletter, and it does help me keep kind of telling these stories and digging for these things and spending more time, leaving voicemails at the St. Lucia Federation offices. I can't necessarily dedicate a few hours a week to that unless people do support the newsletter. So it's always a thrill that people are supporting. But if you're just into dipping your toe a little bit, seeing what's out there, you can check it out. I think by the time people are hearing this, there should be a piece out on, for instance, the next U.S. opponent is El Salvador. I talked to Hugo Perez and his son, Gerson, who's leading the U20 squad, about kind of what's the next steps, because El Salvador has been pretty impressive in Gold Cup and World Cup qualification. How do you push on from that in the face of criticism? And does Hugo Perez want to keep doing that forever as well? Those are the things I'll get into there. We're going to be standing Costa Rica this week as they go up against New Zealand in a World Cup qualification game. I don't usually take sides. I'm usually extremely neutral, but when it's CONCACAF versus any other country, I mean, you got to go CONCACAF. So
Of course.
if this stuff is making you giggle or you're into this, Getting CONCACAF is the place for you. And I hope people will check it out.
Yeah, I subscribed as fast as I could when you came out with it. It has absolutely been worth every dime. I love the content. I do have a request though.
All
We
right, let's hear it.
on our Soccer Over There show on Monday nights, where things can sometimes get off the rails a little bit. We have a picks of the week segment where we will find random games all over the world. And a lot of times we like to dig into Central America when we can. And we went on a tangent recently on the Guatemalan League and their mascots. Their
Mm.
mascots are incredible. First off, I've just been blown away by all the different mascots in Guatemala. But some of the smaller clubs there that have hopped up, I think it was FC Santa Lucia that won a
hmm
league title here recently, and this crazy looking jaguar of a mascot. I'm requesting a feature on mascots in
All
CONCACAF.
right, I'll see what I can do. That would be our second Santa Lucia newsletter, because the leading scorer of the Guatemalan League is Isaac Acuna, who is eligible to represent the U.S. or
Yeah.
Mexico in international play now. He probably isn't going to do either because he's a bit older, but could come to North America. He's a bit of a baller. He scored,
Mhm.
leading goal scorer in Guatemala. So I'll look at the mascots. Truly, it sometimes it's mascots and sometimes it's a dude who's the leading scorer in Guatemala, and I think that's the beauty of our region, and I think that's the beauty of what I'm trying to do. So I'll put it on the list. I do have a list.
It's the beauty of the game, you know. I mean, we like the serious stuff and we get intense with, a World Cup qualifier with Costa Rica, but yeah, we like some fun too.
We have fun around here.
We try. I think Tuesday is going to be fun with Pachuca and Atlanta. I'm looking forward to it. I want to see a lot of the young talent on display. It looks like from the Austin game, it was kind of a split squad a little bit of as much first choice as you could be, and then a lot of the kids in the second half. Austin did the same. I'm kind of expecting Atlanta to do the same with a league matchup on Sunday. So
Yeah,
it'll be a little bit of everything on Tuesday night.
and who doesn't love a little bit of everything?
Got to see that next generation coming through. But then, you'd like to see Joseph Martinez get a goal or two here as well as he's coming back from injury. So looking forward to it. Thanks for the insight on not just Pachuca, but on CONCACAF and everything else you're doing, Jon. Much appreciated. Where can everybody follow what you're up to?
Yeah, I always say that just like CONCACAF, finding me is probably just one step too complicated. The newsletter is getconcacaf.substack.com. My Twitter is Arnold, Jon, spell out comma, no H in John. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I don't really do much of the other social networks anymore. I just got tired of them. So that's the best place to kind of use as a clearinghouse. I've been doing during Nations League. I guess by the time this comes out, I'll be done with it. But a daily video series where I just tell you, like, this is my favorite CONCACAF Nations League game of the day. So again, if you're into this stuff, if you listen to this podcast for 25 minutes, it might be the space for you. So I'll look forward to chatting with some Atlanta fans over there on at Arnold, Jon, and on the newsletter at get concacaf.substack.com. See, even I don't know. Just Google. It'll show up. We pray.
Eventually. Thanks so much, Jon. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Take care.